Thank you, Patrick. It is good to be back again. So, yeah, I bring this out once a year now. I've had this for about 5 or 6 years, and the only day of the year I wear it is the day I'm on this stage. I just have to keep it going. It's perfect. All right, how far away from this thing can I be to have it work? Is probably me. There we go. Well, not quite. Vaguely nearby. So this is my 14th time at this conference. I've got the most boring slide deck, by the way, because I just hate fucking about with the buttons and the transitions. I'm Australian too, so I might swear a little bit. So those of you who haven't met me, you're going to learn to know me very well by the end of this presentation. So, as stated, I'm originally from Australia. I have about 30 years in the Apple sphere, I want to say. The last 5 were with Jamf. Well, actually, if I want to get really technical, it's the last 4 years, 360 days, because my last day is 5 days before the 4-year mark, which is Thursday. Before the 5-year mark, which is Thursday this week. It's just time to do something else. I need a little bit of a break. I will be cooking, going to the beach, playing guitars, sleeping a lot, and fixing everything around the house that I'm told to fix. That's going to be my new life for the next 3 months. And then I'll figure out what happens next year. Previous to that, I spent 10 years at a company called Mondata, which specialized in installation packages. And currently, I live in Mexico, and that was for time zone convenience while I was in Jamf. Because if you're in Australia and you have to overlap with the US and you have to overlap with Europe in the same day, you get meeting requests that have a comment out of it saying, setting at 4 a.m. for a more convenient time for Duncan. I don't know how fucking convenient they think that is, but really not. That sort of stopped happening, hence the change of time zone. It's pretty good. Now I only have to do 6 a.m., so slightly more convenient, still inconvenient, but whatever. And if you want there's sort of an image of what it's like where I live in Mexico, it's not dissimilar to Australia. It's a nice little sleepy place on the west coast. It's very chill, got good infrastructure, and this is about a 5-minute walk from my house where I walk the dogs on occasion. So this was the only photo I could find of me 15 years ago, and I didn't bother enhancing it because it was after the last night of the conference, and the timestamp says it was at 2:14 a.m. And when I look around this room, I see a bunch of faces who were in other photos that go with this set. And unfortunately, I also saw a bunch of faces of people who are no longer with us. But that was my first foray here was in 2010. I was trying to put the timeline together. So this is my 14th version, as I missed one a couple of years ago. And I wanted to go back to the brief for my original presentations because I met Tico in Chicago at an Apple event. And this was when he invited me along. And it was, so you're going to talk about packaging. I said, okay, cool. Sessions are 55 minutes, no more, no less. Don't expect any questions, everybody's shy. I like lots of live demos, so you have to do lots of live demos. I ended up doing 2 presentations. So one was on packaging, which is good for live demos because it's pretty hard to mess up because it's just straight up and down, you can walk through it. The other one was on a now defunct large-scale storage solution that is much less good for live demos, and I was on Monday and Thursday. I think it was only a 3-day conference those weeks, and my Thursday session tanked so hard because everything just kept failing. So anyway, I thought I'd revisit packaging again because it's much harder to fuck it up. Well, that's not entirely true. You can make a mess of things, so anyway. I'm out of range again, and I move around a lot. I think that's my ADD brain. Last year, if you go to the docs page for last year, I just put the link up there, go have a look at Rich Trouton's session. There are things that he did in this that he did so well that no one needs to ever look at them again. Just use that as your reference material. It was a really good introduction. It was an excellent session, and he covered off the stuff that hasn't changed since last year is the signing, the notarization, all of those things. In fact, none of the stuff has changed. I'm just digging a little bit deeper into it and going through the surface a little bit more. But I thoroughly recommend, if you want the basics, this is a really good place to start, and it will get you moving along in this. I am going to be digging a little bit deeper, and the why is not so much to enable everybody to do this, but it's more about as an admin, because we have so many tools out there that do things for us, and vendors provide things with packages in them, and it's not about doing it yourself unless you really, really, really want to. It's more about understanding what other people have done. So I'm just going to scratch the surface and pull things back and explain what all of these things mean, which will assist you in a way to be to better understand stuff and handle deployments, because there's a lot of little quirks in there you see, and the reasoning behind it I quite often don't understand, but I do understand how they got there. But by the way, you can use any of this to build your own stuff if you want to be a complete control freak and build all of your own stuff and repackage everything and do those things. But it's more or less information which is a handy reference point to get ahead. We are going to focus on the component package, and we're going to work through that. And I'll just start with a very simple set of options, and we're going to build out, and we'll just keep iterating over and over again, and you'll see more and more stuff that can be done. And things, I'll try and clarify some things that are actually, I don't want to say poorly documented, but they're difficult to understand from the man page because the references are obscure. Right. The most important thing in a package, like an installer package, when you unpack it and have a look in it, is the package info file. I will be picking on Firefox. I'm not picking on Firefox. I'm actually just using it because it's an easy thing. It comes as both a package and a DMG. It's very straightforward. It's very simple. We can walk through this knowing some very common things about a very common application that everybody is going to be able to understand quite simply. So inside an installer package, and Rich breaks down the anatomy of it, there is this baby here, which is the package info file. This tells you everything that package is going to do. There is some stuff in here that is subtly confusing due to just what it means. And I've wrapped the text on this mostly, and I think I can see everything that really matters, or probably not. No, not quite. Yeah, enough. I've wrapped it enough. The very first thing is the attributes for the package info tag have a thing in there called relocatable. This is not the application auto-detecting where it is. That is a different property that we'll talk about later on. This relocatable flag is handled by a distribution when you build a distribution package that has multiple component packages in it and you want to choose a custom install location. So that's where that one comes into play. So it's just good to know, because a lot of times if you're looking in one, you'll say it says it's relocatable, but it's not relocating, and something else that we were looking for handles the relocation from that. But like I said, we'll touch on that later. So we're not going to go through every single one of these, just the ones that you can easily change from the command line with pkg build. So we'll start. The very first thing, I was going to do this all with live demos, by the way, and then I realized it's just me typing. In fact, Steve drove it home for me, Mr. Heyman, wherever he's hiding somewhere. He's probably deleting slides at the moment. Drove it home for me. He says, nobody wants to see you stand on stage and typing. That's a very good point. But I also hate watching videos, because this would be the most boring video in the world. You would see me open a terminal, enter this command, nothing would happen, then it would tell you a package came out. The end. So I took screenshot before, screenshot after. That's what we're going to see. Sometimes screenshot during if I was bored. So this is a very, very simple build command. By the way, this is a fake terminal, and the text will be all copy pastable, or copy and pastable if you want to do stuff on your own computer from the slide deck when it gets published later. So that makes that easy. When you enter that command, it says it's going to do stuff. I want you to pay particular attention, because I did it with what's called one of the two options from pkg build. One is component, one is root. I'm going to dive into root later, but component, you point it at an application. I've pointed it at Firefox on its original DMG. You'll see a little line up there that says it inferred an install location of volumes Firefox. That's where it wants to install it. And that's not quite right. In fact, that's going to be quite problematic, because if we look in our package info file, you will see that its install location is volumes Firefox. And that is going to basically crap its pants. And that's not good. So we need to fix that. So first option for PKG build with a component, which is one of the things that I would call the mandatory options to always put it in there, is tell it where you want it to go. And it can go anywhere on the system, and that's fine. And so that becomes very simple. You'll see that when we've gone through that a second time, it's not inferring an install location. And if we have a look here, we can see that it's now putting it in the place that we said we wanted to put it. This is good. So like I said, I'm going to start basic, and we're going to accelerate. And I've got to keep an eye on the time because I don't want to go too fast and melt everyone's brains, and I don't want to go too slow and bore everyone shitless because that's less fun too. So we've corrected that. We've got the correct install location. That's working. That's pretty much the simplest possible way to build a package, and it gets it out there without the signing stuff, which you can go and look up on Rich's presentation. It's all good. This is one of my personal favorites. Now, interestingly, this was incorporated in product build and then has since been removed. The flag that we care about is the minimum system version. And the minimum system version, I believe in now, I'm going to ask Armin a question if he's in the room anywhere. Is Armin's hand here? Because you'll be able to tell me because you catalog the history and shit. macOS 10.12, when that came along in PKG build? Is it 10.12, Armin? Yeah, you put it down so nobody actually had to remember it. They can always reference the material. I'm pretty sure it was macOS 10.12. So the minimum operating system version sets a requirement for the package to install. However, it's the next line that really matters in this command, which is compression. Because they introduced a thing, and I want to say macOS 10.12, so I can be wrong, but or not wrong, but I think it was 10.12. Where it actually optimizes the compression for the version of the OS that you set the minimum version to. They haven't really changed it. There's been no optimization since they introduced this, but when they did introduce it, it made a hell of a difference. And especially when we were packaging stuff on scale at Jamf, if you have a look at the output, so the second demo package here, which we have there, you can see is 178.5 megs. The third one, however, drops 50 off that. You deploy that to 2 million max, and that makes a big difference to your bill. Like, huge difference to your bill. And that was the sort of scale I was looking at the moment. That's my personal favorite thing, is compressing that footprint to make the smallest possible packages. And I was very happy to see that one come along. I gotta remember what I was doing here this time. That looks vaguely familiar, like the last one. Oh no, not quite. So before I was using the component build. This is what happens when you use the root, which means that you specify the folder containing what you want to install as the package root. Now, some people do this with application bundles, like single application bundles, which I thoroughly recommend using a component build for. But if you want to install multiple bundles or a folder with stuff in it, or you want to do some fancier manipulations, shall we say, you'll have to delve into the concept of using the package root. If you point the package root at the application itself will become the installation folder, which means that your install location would have to be, in this case, it would have to be applications firefox.app, and your root would be volumes firefox.app. But then you get some weird shit going on with the bundles, and we're going to dig into that a little bit later on, but it's just important to know it's the contents of the folder you specify the root what is going to end up on your system. And as you can see, the output of this is actually a little bit more verbose. There's a lot going on in here. And it's because we haven't specified a single component bundle, it's breaking it down and it's giving us all of the other little bits, apps, frameworks, other bundles that are inside the application bundle. Now, this can be useful for certain things that I could not understand why you would want to do it, but I can understand how you would leverage it. And fortunately, I don't think anyone is leveraging this at the moment, so I'm not going to melt everyone's brains and dig right into it. But you would be able to update subcomponents of a particular application without touching the main bundle. And given that we have code signing now, it would break the application and everything would go to pieces. And so it's not so good. But this is what happens with a default root. Look, we can see that we now have a larger package info file with more bundles in it, and we can see that bundles are subparts of stuff and things are sort of a little bit all over the shop. Okay, fair enough. However, this is a problem because I pointed it at the same DMG. That DMG has the alias for where you need to drop it. That would end up in your applications folder. The background from the DMG, the volume icon, and the Firefox app itself. We don't want any of that stuff. So this is not so good. And when I talked about things that were poorly explained in the man page, was actually the syntax for using what's called the filter option for package build, which is almost a regular expression, or mostly a regular expression, shall I say. But and it'll only work on names, not file types or anything along those lines. So you can see that the application folder, its name was actually a space, so we needed to trim that off. The DS store file, which we want to get rid of that, the icon, and the background file. And so all of those go away, and we do the same build command, but with a filter in front of it, which is good if you're not wanting to copy particular things off the installation media and just use the primary installation media for building your package. So you mount a DMG and away you go. Nice and easy. And when we have a look at our package this time around, if we're looking inside it, we can see that the payload only has the Firefox application in it. I didn't cheat and just put the hidden files hidden again. This is because the alias would still be there. So this is where we end up at that scenario. We're now using the root. We're now filtering off unwanted files. And we're sort of building a bit of a framework to move into the next steps. Now, these two things, these keys, being identifier and version, are usually inferred. I didn't think I was going to have to skip back, but I will. They're usually inferred in, and I'm going to have to go way back to where I wrapped the text around. In here, we can see that we have an identifier in this package, which is org.mozilla.firefox. So it infers the identifier of the application itself and the version of the application itself. Now, that's really good if you want the package receipt to reflect the application's identifier and the package receipt to reflect the application's version. But you might be a bit like me, or, yeah, well, like anally retentive and probably a little bit crazy. I liked to change the identifier or create a custom identifier which actually had the word PKG in it. So most of Apple's things are done like this, and give the package a version which is the version of the type of package I'm making, or actually the version of the thing I'm using to build the packages. So I know what version format that package was and what I've iterated on internally while I'm making things. And so that makes things actually a little bit more manageable and a little bit more trackable, and it doesn't necessarily, it's completely, and I cannot stress this enough, it is completely decoupled from the application. This is like the package's own bundle identifier and version, but the standard praxis and the standard inference is to use the application's bundle identifier and version. So, but you can separate those things out, and you can have things like, even if you were to just use the application version as a default, which I think this is like Firefox 143 point something, whatever it was last week, and just change the identifier yourself, it makes it easier when you're looking for package receipts or bundles or searching your system. There's a few little quirks that it comes in handy for. Next one is the ownership flag. So this has no bearing on the package info whatsoever, but when it builds the payload or the BOM, it will actually provide it with a recommended set of like user and group, which is going to default to root will, but you could always change it to preserve if you wanted to preserve particularly a particular user and group of a component of an application when you are creating that package. And then there's a preserve other, which I've never actually used and I failed to understand properly, so I'm not going to talk about that. But if you were to copy the payload off to a temporary location, and then you set the owner and group to be 9999, so anyone can edit it. Not sure why you would want to do that. Don't recommend doing that. Please don't take that as a thing you would do, but the package would then come down with any user being able to modify anything in that application because it doesn't actually, it has a nobody owner, which is a possibility, but you would use the preserve rather than a recommended for that. Now, there's this weird quirk, and if anyone is able to answer this for me, I should probably have figured out what the bounty would be, but I've never been able to understand why this is different. And I have done all sorts of things, particularly using LSBOM for the bill of materials that's in the package. This was built using component build. This is our number of files. This was built using root. It's the same source material, yet we have 301 files. And I don't know why. There are a few things like extended attributes that float around, potentially resource forks, maybe a Mac ACL, anything along those lines. But no amount of cleaning on my part has ever been able to make those two numbers match. And so I don't know why. And when I say they don't match, it's like they probably won't match here, and they won't match here ever. But if you use the lsbom command to actually look at the bill of materials that comes out of the package, you will never, ever be able to get them matched. The closest I got was a difference of 4. And that was stripping all of the extended attributes and things like that. And I was like, it's the same fucking thing. Why is this doing this? It was driving me mad. But I'm going to leave that alone. It's just something to be aware of, that it seems to be arbitrary and it has no real relevance to anything. So don't be too concerned about that. A next very important thing is scripts. As you can see, I've just ripped, I think this is Adobe Acrobat Reader or something like that. You can see that we have a scripts tag in the XML file, and we have a pre-install and a post-install script. If you have a folder called scripts and you call it using the scripts flag to build the package, it will automatically assign pre-install and post-install to it. Now, under that, you can see that there's those two, which Rich has covered off very well in his presentation. There is one here that I've made a little note of. You can put an attribute on the file, which is component ID, and then you can give it a bundle identifier of an application. So if you have something that has multiple applications in there and you feed it a component ID, if that application is already on the device and the package doesn't do anything, or it glosses over that as part of the install, particularly useful when you're doing distributions, it won't run that script. It will only run it if that bundle is installed, which is really good for doing one-off installs. Now, there is a way that you can get this to actually be used from the command line without editing the package info, so you don't have to unpack the package and put it back together or anything like that. There are switches that you can allow to do that. And it becomes very useful if you want to, and you can also detect an application that you're not installing, just an application that might be on the disk. Apple used to use this trick for moving old versions of Keynote out of the way when they changed the bundle identifier. This is like, this probably predates me being on this stage altogether. I think it was Kia, like, iWork 09, something like that. This is like really old school stuff, but still useful. Now, also, I wrote this and I baked it into a few packages because what I can say here is that just doing a little bit of a printf and throwing out all of my positional parameters and everything so that we could actually see what was going on when the script was executed, because I want to say 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago at Jamf, I was having horrible problems with this, and then I realized that not all installer environments are created equal. And making an assumption, if anyone's ever seen Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, assumption is the mother of all, and we'll leave it there. And it took me a while to realize it, that you have, which I was familiar with, you have the GUI environment, and then you have the CLI environment. There is a flag that a lot of people use in their scripts that if they detect it is a CLI install, so you're installing from the command line, it's going to behave differently, or it's going to have certain other things that you can do with it. However, what I did not know was that the MDM install was different. And we were pushing, with Jamf app installers, we were pushing everything out using MDM. And that changed we had to change the way we did everything because of this. Because there were certain things in the MDM install that were not honored, that are honored from a GUI install or a command line install. And I suspect that the App Store environment is also different. It is probably closer to the MDM install, but I don't know because I would have to submit a package to the App Store and get it approved that had this script in it, which is never, ever going to happen. It's just not something I can do. So if we have a look at, this is all of the environment variables when you dump it out from a package. So that is that script hooked up in a payload-free package as a pre-install command. You can see where it was sitting on my computer. You can see all of the positional parameters that were in package info, that were passed to it when it was launched, because it just installs to the system root. There's no payload. One is the system root, one is that, whatever. You can see where its temporary directory is. You can see what shell environment it's using. You can see the installer has a specific temporary directory, which actually turns out is the exact same thing as the tempdir variable. You can see what command line mode you have for the ISO encoding for the script. You can see just all sorts of useful bits of information. Like you can see what user account was active when you installed the package. You can see the package session ID is actually the same as the bundle identifier of the package, which means that if you wanted to leverage the identifier of the package during a pre or a post-install task, which I've had to do in the past, is useful. And you can also see what the command was that I ran at the end for printf to get this out. Now, from that, that's good. Now, I believe this is just a post-install script, so we flick back and forward between these two. You'll see that pre-install becomes post-install. And I wanted to use a post-install because I'm going to use a post-install for every single one of these things so that we get some consistency and you can actually see the changes. Now, did anyone notice that? Yes, no? Anyone? Right. What do we see as the big change? Definitely. And the command mode. Don't know whether it has any bearing on anything, but it's just something that I keep in the back of my mind. So when you install via the command line, your user context changes to root, although your home directory still stays the same. So that's a little bit weird, but your context of execution is root. So you are a user executing with root privileges. It's still using your home directory as where you are. Now, this is where it gets interesting. This is the MDM installer. So this was a package I built deliberately, pushed it out via MDM using the MDM install enterprise application command, and we can see that there's quite a few differences here. Most of it is to do with the way it's assigning temp directories, but the big ones that I found were interesting is the home directory, var_db app store, and the username is _bar app store. And when we were doing, it had a bearing on the context execution that the App Store account has from a privilege perspective for the OS. So if you're using something that is pushing things out straight via MDM, you need to be aware of how this is going to behave. And you can switch to this user account and do it from there. I don't know what the App Store is, but I'm guessing that it is very, very close to that. The key differences between the App Store and the MDM command is that the App Store seemed to interact with the distribution file in the package. We'll come back to distributions. And the MDM command doesn't. And previously, the MDM command did actually, when I was first looking at this, required you to have a distribution and a wrapper around the component package. Now it doesn't. You can, as long as it's signed, you can just send a signed component package out via MDM now, which is good because it cuts down on a lot of work. Right. The bundle tag. Each bundle, which we can see that with this one where I was using the root thing, we have a lot of bundles in there. But there are 4 main things that you will see very commonly, and then there's that last one, which I don't see very often, and I pretty much only saw it with Apple stuff once upon a time. But it uses these for determining the version of the application that you're going to be installing. So it has some characteristics about the bundle. The identifier helps it find the application. The short version thing is the first thing that is compared, and if there's enough of a difference there that a decision can be made, that's all that is compared. The second thing that happens after that is it will fall back if you have two things with the same short version string but they have a different bundle version. It will make a decision based upon the bundle version. Now, if you have things where those two things are the same, and this is where this weird one came into place, it has a source version tag. So if the application has a source version in the info plist of the application, it will fall back to that. Once again, this is like those component IDs attached to a script. It's very old, and I think I've only ever seen it in Apple stuff. So I don't see that around anymore, but I just found that very interesting, that there was a third thing that happens with your package where the version comparison is done. Now, that might be useful, might not be useful, but it may help you troubleshoot something if anybody ever uses that. Very important to kind of keep the things in the back of your mind that you don't see often, but if you see them once, you know that they can possibly make a mess of things for you. Right. Now, there is this bundle ID tag, which nests under a lot of other tags. So if we look at this, we've got bundle version, upgrade bundle, update bundle, atomic update bundle, strict identifier, relocate. But all of those are assigned, as in the graphic on this one, a bundle ID for the application that you're installing. These determine the things that are going to happen during the install routine. I believe this is, what is this, my 153 files? Yeah, this is a straight component build, default format. This is what happens. Because it's, and I'm not going to touch on all of these because a couple of these are really complicated. And it's just, it'd be like me dissecting. Who was here when I dissected NetBoot? Anyone? Yeah, did you hurt afterwards? I hurt. So I don't want to dig into that level of granularity, but a couple of those tags, if theoretically you could get the previous version of application, the next version of an application, create a delta of what has changed between those two, and then you can use the update bundle tag, and you can apply it as a delta update, and you would change the footprint of what's happening as a delta install, and you would install hopefully much less stuff. Unfortunately, because of code signing, everything changed with that, and pretty much you reinstall everything anyway, so nobody cares and nobody really uses that anymore, and I'm not going to go down that path. When I say nobody really uses that anymore, a couple of people reference it, but I don't think it is used correctly because the update bundle thing is in Adobe Acrobat updaters, and it is in Microsoft Delta updates, but they're not the Delta updates that are used in MAU. MAU uses a different set, which are binary deltas, where it lays everything down and uses a BS patch routine and updates everything, and it takes the footprint of the update from like 700 meg to about 150 meg, and that's kind of cool, but subject to other things where you dig into scripting and probably brain aches and other issues, but they seem to have got that fairly stable and got a good build routine for that. So we'll leave them alone and they can keep doing that, and we don't have to download tons and tons of shit, and that's all good. So these are the ones we're going to look at. Bundle version, upgrade bundle, strict identifier, and relocate. In order to build a component plist, this is where it starts to get interesting, because if you look in the man page for PKG build, you'll see that it has this little analyze tag, and then it has a reference when you're using a root to a component plist. And this is the stuff that I find is, or can be useful, and understanding this is going to help with troubleshooting and also building things in a smart way, particularly if you want to repackage something to create a particular outcome in your environment. So this is the output of the analyze thing. The file goes on and on and on. The part that we don't really care about, because I mentioned back before we had all of those bundles when we analyzed it from the root. So these are all of those child bundles which reference the inside of the application. There's lots of them and things like that. And unless you are doing Delta updates, these things are basically irrelevant. So collapsing that to take that out of the way, and this is really the meat of the issue. Just having those 5 tags in your XML file, sorry, in your plist file. Now, I should mention this. Please note, can anyone see what's unusual about this property list? The root element is an array, not a dictionary. So it is an array of dictionaries, because the root element of a plist by default, so if you use defaults to create one of these, the root element will be a dictionary and it will not work. The output of this is an array. So if you have to build one of these by hand or you want to cut it in any other way, you have to use plist-buddy. So this creates this file, which is just an empty array at the root level of the plist, which is slightly weird, and I've made that mistake for a while and had my day of crazy trying to work out why everything was not working, because I'd never even thought to look at that tag. From that, you can do things. You can build on it. This is what I would call the bare minimum, which is we have to add a dictionary to the top of that array. Then we have to add the bundle path to it, which we know what that is. You can programmatically do all of this out. I've just hard-coded it so you can see where you reference it. And then you have to add the overwrite action, or I recommend adding the override action. It probably doesn't matter, but this way what will happen is if it has an existing version of the application on disk, it's going to replace the thing entirely. So if there is something like, I saw this a few weeks ago with the EndNote 22 to 22.01 or something. What happened was there were two files that were in the 22 version that are not in the 22.01 version, and so unless you had this little action in there for doing the install, the application would come across as broken. So this makes sure that the whole bundle is ditched and replaced with this. Very important little piece of information that you should know. Because you'll be just sitting there going, I have to repack it. I repacked it. Doesn't work. Why is it not working when I upgrade it? Installs just fine, but it's not working in an upgrade. Yeah. Anyway, you get the point. It's not fun. That spits out that. All the other keys don't have to exist. It will go to their default values, which, by the way, is true for all of them. So that's fine. And that's what will happen on the output when you build it. So we can just see that we have one bundle tag, which is that. And that is to just say, if you find Firefox on this disk, upgrade it with this version. Side note, first one found. If you do a spotlight, so like an MD find spotlight search from the command line, it's the one at the top of the list, if you have more than one copy of the application on the disk. And that's the one that it will upgrade. Asterisks as well, because that also involves relocate. So things can get a little weird and messy at this point. Am I losing anyone yet? Because so the thing that inspired this talk was this, trying to reflect what the package behavior is. Now, apart from the upgrade bundle, the other keys that I've left alone, which is relocate, strict identifier, and bundle version, those three things have a big impact on what the hell is going on. So I will try and explain this as best I can. That top one there, which is basically all of the possible options for what can happen with those flags, and when there is none on the disk, an older version on the disk, an equal version on the disk, or a newer version on the disk. Yeah, that's about right. Sorry, no, this is not newer version on the disk. This is the package contains an older version, an equal version, or a newer version. Now I remember what I was doing. Sorry, I did this last year when I was actually sitting up the back in Rich's presentation. I just had the idea and I started writing it all down. So if you have an older version on disk, and your bundle version is not checked, it's not going to install. Your bundle version is set to false, it's going to downgrade it. If it is set to true, which is a version check, it is not going to install. If it is equal, it will reinstall the application. It won't simply skip over it because it found the version there, because Apple have catered for it as a reinstall thing. This became a contentious argument when we were designing app installers at Jamf, because I thought we should stick to what Apple do, which was to reinstall it, because people might want to reinstall it, because you don't want to have to remove it to then reinstall it, because that gets more and more complicated, and if we're already upgrading the bundles and everything's good. No, anyway, this is what the packages do, not what we did. By the way, I lost that argument. Now, the conflict thing is to do with the strict identifier tag. And I'm going to come back to this because we'll dive into it a little bit. Some applications change their bundle identifier, and that can cause a problem when you're deploying it with a package. Some applications have a version that is in the App Store that has a different identifier to the application that you have on disk, but it has the same application name. That's going to create a behavioral change when you do the installation where it does what's called a localized install. It creates a folder with the application name and then with a nice little hidden extension that's called .localized, and then inside that there's a localized file, and then inside that is the application that you're installing. And there's a whole bunch of localization strings and other things around it. It's kind of annoying, but this is the default behavior. I would have always thought that it should replace it and move the other thing aside, but these are the things that I don't get. And then based upon other properties, certain other things happen. We have a custom location, which is in the event that a user drags an application to their desktop. If you have the relocate flag enabled, it will search for that bundle identifier in the relocate tag, and it will update that. The first found application is if provided there's not multiples, and that gets complicated and messy and difficult to track down. But it will upgrade the application in that location. Now, if you have already had a strict identifier and you have relocatable and it's got a localized one that is seen as a custom location, so it'll update that. And this is where it just gets all crazy and shit down the bottom. I will leave that for you guys to peruse, but this is the exacting behavior of everything that happens. So when you have a conflict, a custom version, or the default setup of all sorts of things, and then these things happen. So when we are building these things, the first thing that we talked about, version check. That is just, and I like to do version checks because I don't really like downgrading stuff if I don't have to, so this would be a case of ignore what's there and just install the latest version. That's the command to add that. This is for relocatable. Now, this is a decision that people have to make. If you have a post-install script that references the application, you probably want to set relocatable to be false. If you have users that tend to drop applications on their desktop and then run them from there, and you're happily not relocating applications, you're installing it in the applications folder, what's the security risk of which version of the application is which user running? Because they may not be running the one from the applications folder, they may be running the one that they dropped on their desktop. And you are not updating that, and your security and compliance says everything is okay, and it's really not. So just keep that in mind. I tend to like to leave the relocatable flag there and just update it wherever it is, but it buggers up the reporting for all of the MDMs. Well, for JAMPs it did anyway, because we used recon and it's just looking in the applications folder and things like that. Strict identifier handles that conflict thing that I was talking about with the App Store. And to sort of understand what happens with the strict identifier flag, when it is set to true and you have the conflict there, and the package is not relocatable, you have a very unusual thing that happens, is it will create another localized file. So if this was Firefox, it would be Firefox 2, and then you do it again, it would be Firefox 3. So I just decided to put the algorithm down. Like, this is exactly what happens. You can simulate it from here. So this, each time it iterates around, it just creates another localized folder. And so you will find some users end up with like 30 copies of an application sitting on their computer in all different locations, like localized folders, and it sort of gets messy from there. I'd really love it if there was a thing that just gets rid of it. But anyway, this is a very basic thing. This is going to force Firefox to install in the applications folder. It is not going to give a crap about the identifier, so it's going to override anything. Like if someone likes using another browser and they thought, hey, I can cheekily rename this and paste a new icon, like stuff that kids used to do in 2010. This will just stomp that stuff and put them back in line. But that's a pretty basic setup for working through all of these things. Now, building that out, where are we at? So that's building that with the component plist, having all of the stuff in there, and this is what our package info file looks like with that. So this is, we're checking for a version, we're upgrading what we find, we're not relocating, so we're not searching for anything, we're no strict identifiers, so we're not going to create a localized install, and we're going to do everything right from that perspective. And so that gives you a good, healthy install. How am I doing for time? I'm actually ahead. I'll be able to take a couple of questions. This is good. This drove me crazy because I had some weird things happening with packages that I was building that were going into the applications folder where access was being denied. It's just because I was building from a downloads folder and I hadn't removed the Mac ACL, which is actually good to always build from your temp folder because then you can strip off the ACLs and do things. And if you were putting something inside the package that already had a quarantine flag on it, and you didn't want the package to actually prompt the user and you weren't notarizing and things like that, so you could remove the quarantine flag. But in macOS 13, they added the third one, which is provenance. Is anyone familiar with that? Because if you open the package up and you see all of the extended attributes on fucking everything, and you go, why are these here? What is this thing? Where is the goddamn documentation? As it turns out, in macOS 13, if you still have SIP enabled, which I encourage you all to do that, don't disable it just for this, and you delete the quarantine flag, it creates the provenance flag. And that provenance flag is immutable. You cannot remove it. It tells you that you deleted the quarantine flag. This is how you maximize a process. And it can't go away. And then people like me sit at their computer for 2.5 days screaming at it, mainlining coffee, going, why the fuck is this doing this? What is this? Why does this not go away? Why is this appearing? Why can't I make it go away? And then I built it on a macOS 12 machine. I was like, why is it not there? So there was a bunch of crazy that went into that, but it's just like fair warning when you see it. That's what it is. That's what it does. It really, like, once the provenance thing there and the quarantine thing's gone, you're not going to get nudged, but you'll have like an extended attribute on everything, so it'll do a fork split and it'll double the file count if you're using a root build and blah, 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 blah. Reference material. This is kind of important. That is your Bible for this. There is more stuff in here. When I was talking about making deltas and things like that, all of the tools, once you understand what I've already showed you, all of the tools appear in that man page, and you can just figure the next parts out and play with stuff. Or if you see some weird things relating to those tags, you can go backwards and see what it means in the man page as to why it was used or what it does or what it actually has effect on. Next. I didn't want to go flat out today and melt everyone's brain, so just look at the man page. It's the same shit. This is like, if I get invited back next year, I'll do that. We'll follow it up. I'll do the second half of this presentation, but I just didn't want to go so brain-meltingly fast this year. I just wanted to take it easy on everyone for a change. So I am open for questions, and I will answer everything as honestly and completely as I can. Does anyone have any? Yes? In your crazy table, yeah. There's actually like 4 like mega rows, right? Because you've got pattern 000, 001. So there's really only 4. Like you're accounting for each one of the... Every possible combination of everything. 4 sets of those. Yes. Yeah, okay. 32 outcomes. No. That's absolutely. And I shared this with a few people last year, and they just looked at me like I was crazy. No, I totally get it. But yeah, it starts over every time there's a 111. Yeah, it's like it's an octal table where you can see that I think we achieve every combination of everything, but we also have to have the outcomes of the location of what's already on disk as part of that. So this is where it goes above the like. No, it's not that harsh. It's harsh, but not that harsh. Cool. That's how fast I could have done it. Anything else? And by the way, you can ask me anything about packaging anytime you want. Most of the time I can answer it off the top of my head without looking anything up. Having made a few 100,000 of them in my life. Cool. Muchas gracias, peeps.
Thank you very much.